You didn't think I was going to broadcast the whole show wearing sunglasses, did you? That was just a gag. To make the point that this will be a short, sharp show, and that will continue over the next few weeks, and will be supplemented by my Wednesday evening, 10 p.m. London time, Galloway show. That's no budget television. This is next to no budget television. But on October the 12th, we'll be returning with full length, all singing, all dancing, 2 mother of all talk shows a week, one on a Sunday at 7 p.m. UK time, one on a Wednesday at 10 p.m. So make a note, make a date with me for October. Now, there are tumultuous events unfolding across the world. In Sri Lanka, hundreds of thousands of people stormed the presidential palace. It's a scene that keeps tyrants and potentates awake at nights. It's been the nightmare of every dictatorial, authoritarian ruler in all history. Because once the people move in such numbers, then not only will your security forces not be prepared to fire on them, but if they did fire on them, it would make no difference, because no magazine contains that many bullets, and as soon as the magazine was dry, the people would pull the soldiers limb from limb. It's exactly the kind of revolution, the mass movement of millions of people that saw the overthrow of the Shah of Persia in 1979, when the masses, under the influence of the Ayatollah Khomeini, finally moved after decades of dictatorship. The Shah was all-powerful. His secret police, the SAVAK, were the most feared in the entire Middle East, North African area, although there was hot competition for that title. But the last straw, no one can tell when the last straw has been laden on the camel's back. If you could tell, you wouldn't lay it on the camel's back. But you can't tell if that last straw was the one that broke the camel's back. And the Shah of Persia ended his life fleeing in ignominy, and so has the President and the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka. We covered this just a couple of weeks ago. You should look back the interview, which foretold with uncanny accuracy exactly what transpired this week. The President has fled on board a naval ship. The airport was chock full of the bag carriers of the administration, fleeing for their private jets, trying to get on the last commercial flights out of Colombo. The Prime Minister stepped down, but that didn't stop the crowd from burning down the Prime Minister's house. In the presidential palace, the masses, the people, were taking a dip in the president's swimming pool. Well, it was their swimming pool after all. They were taking pictures of themselves, lounging in the sumptuous accommodation, until then occupied by the president of Sri Lanka, who ran a family business. His brothers were the main ministers, his cousins, his satrapies of all kinds were running all of Sri Lanka. Now, this does not mean that because something has the form of revolution, that it will have the content of revolution. I have no idea what will happen next in Sri Lanka. In Iran, there was a leader, and he had a clear program, and he had millions behind it. And that's why all these decades later, the Islamic Revolution of Iran still stands. I'm unaware of any putative leader or any program in Sri Lanka. So it may very well be that the country will continue to spiral downwards and will not be able to be saved. The Prime Minister already declared the country to be a failed state and bankrupt, as indeed he might. But that state of affairs is going to spill over across the world, including into Europe. Right this day, in Tirana, in Albania. Hundreds of thousands of people are on the march. They are determined to bring down the regime, a neoliberal regime beholden to the European Union and all of its works. We'll be coming on to some of those works later. Beholden to the International Monetary Fund and to the World Bank, destroying the livelihoods of the people of Albania, and they are determined to bring down the regime. The people in Bulgaria have already brought down their regime. Draghi, the Prime Minister of Italy, had to flee Madrid and the NATO summit this week to return to Italy, where Italian farmers in the vanguard, but joined by students and workers of all kinds, have begun to demand the fall of another Blairite EU regime. And Draghi is going to be dragged off the political scene very soon. And Rutte is headed down the shooter in the Netherlands, which is one of the most interesting cases in point. My good wife was born and raised and educated in the Netherlands. It happens, therefore, that I know a fair bit about that country and its government. If Tony Blair had a Dutch brother, it would be Mark Rutte, achingly politically correct on all of the culture war issues, never gets his pronouns wrong, wears the rainbow when necessary, adds the black to the rainbow, adds the PTQPTTIs, question mark, he does everything that you would expect a Blairite to do. He takes the knee. But when the neoliberal economic policy that he pursues, the slavish obeisance to Brussels and the European Union, comes under challenge, well, they shoot farmers in the Netherlands, don't they? Imagine that. A liberal, centrist, Blairite Prime Minister turned the guns of his security forces onto the farmers. But it hasn't worked. You see, it's that last straw on the camel's back again. Farmers everywhere are tired of the green orthodoxy that is putting farming out of business, putting meat beyond the pale, accusing farting cows of courting catastrophe in the environment in the world, when the United States military has a bigger carbon footprint than the next 8 countries in the world put together. Just think about that. And of course, those that are forever talking about farting cows and the need to eat grasshoppers rather than cheeseburgers are the very same people endlessly advocating for war and weapons, pouring them in to the war in the Ukraine to keep it going as long as possible. So don't talk to me about eating grasshoppers whilst you're destroying the world with your war and your weapons. That's a conclusion, incoherent maybe, which has been reached by farmers and farming communities. I'm going to let you in on a secret. I have driven over much of Europe over the last couple of weeks. I have not seen, I swear, on any private building or business, a single Ukrainian flag on the continent of Europe, on anybody's house, on anybody's shop, on anybody's cafe or restaurant. That tells you something. It tells you, first of all, that Ukraine mania is an Anglo-Saxon thing, not a European thing. It tells you a second thing, that the European public is vitally aware that the Joe Biden administration, egged on by Boris Johnson, has dragged Europe onto the brink of catastrophe, economic catastrophe, social catastrophe, cultural catastrophe. And the people are mad as hell, and they're not going to put up with it anymore. Just this day, the farmers in the Netherlands went into an aircraft hangar and towed Ruta's jet out with a tractor. I don't know where they've taken it, officer. If I did, I'd tell you. But they have towed away the Prime Minister's jet in the Netherlands. There could be a revolution in the Netherlands. Words I never thought I'd ever be able to say. The truth is that Macron has lost his majority. Biden has lost his marbles. And Johnson has lost his office. Let me turn to what happened to Boris Johnson. Johnson was overthrown by his own colleagues, but they were not acting in a vacuum. For many months, there has been a full, deep state-inspired and organized coup to bring down Boris Johnson. Not to allow a real change of government, not to by any means allow a real change of system, no, to save this form of government, to save this form of system. They wanted rid of Johnson so that their system could be put in a safer pair of hands. For the avoidance of doubt, and there are a surprisingly large number of idiots out there who imagine that somehow I'm sympathetic either to Johnson or to any one of his putative successors. Damn them all, I say. Every Conservative, every New Labourite, damn Starmer, damn Johnson. I'm against them all, would vote for none of them. But it's my job as a person in charge of the Open University of the airwaves to tell you the truth as I see it. And the truth is that they can't have got rid of Johnson because of birthday cakes and parties, because they were all eating curries or birthday cakes. They were all drinking beer or champagne. Keir Starmer did exactly what Boris Johnson did and Rishi Sunak did. They got fined for it. He didn't. He didn't because the power in the country is determined that Tweedledee might be needed if Tweedledum doesn't work. Plan B if Plan A doesn't work. And so Angela Rayner, the ginger growler, Keir Starmer, the block of wood, are still standing, even though their offences were identical. Indeed, you could argue that Starmer's was worse. So it wasn't about, neither was it about covering up for the weirdos in Parliament that ramble around drunk, sticking their hands down men's trousers. Because they're all doing that. If not men's trousers, then women's trousers. Our Parliament is a sink of perversion. It is a sink of sin. Even members of the cabinet, even people running to be the Prime Minister, are presently, or at least until very recently, were committing adultery, cheating on their husbands or wives. So it's not about Pincher or Pincham, because that's always been going on. I sat in a parliament where Stephen Milligan, formerly of the BBC and The Economist, became a Conservative MP before being found dead in women's underwear with a ligature around his neck and an orange stuffed in his mouth. And that was nearly 25 years ago. So it's not because Pincham was staggering around in Clubland, unable to say his name and fondling young men who had no interest in his advances. The chief whip of the SNP has already been found guilty of doing exactly the same thing. The SNP reappointed him as their chief whip years after, knowing exactly what he was. Parliament is full of weirdos. Trust me, I've even had some of their hands on my knee. You can see it on YouTube. I've just been talking about it. That's not why they got rid of Johnson. They got rid of Johnson because they want to replace him with Rishi Sunak, the richest man in Christendom. I say Christendom, he's not a Christian, but he lives in Christendom. And he's the richest man in Christendom, at least so far as British politics is concerned, not just because he is himself a multi-millionaire, but because he had the very, very savvy sense to fall in love and marry an heiress to several billion pounds. So he doesn't need to be in public office. You won't probably catch him fiddling his expenses, although his wife was fiddling her taxes. She was registered as a non-domiciled in Britain, whilst her husband was the Chancellor of the Exchequer of Great Britain, charged with the responsibility of bringing taxes in. His own wife had her billions parked offshore so that she would not have to pay tax on them. Why do they want Rishi Sunak? Because they want Britain back in the European Union. Not necessarily as a all-singing, all-dancing member of the European Union, not even necessarily de jure back in the single market, but they want to bring us close to the single market. They want to realign us with the single market. They want to reverse Brexit. And as Michael Heseltine told anyone that was listening on the television all week, no Boris, no Brexit. They think. Although if they try to do that, they will unleash the same kind of potentially ungovernable forces in Britain that Mark Rutte has unleashed in the Netherlands, that have been unleashed in Bulgaria, in Tirana, Albania, who knows, even in Sri Lanka. I think that Rishi Sunak is the man to beat. He has many opponents, 9 at the last count. One of them, surprisingly, had to pull out. Ben Wallace, the great war leader, 4'11", talking about President Putin having small man syndrome, talk about living in a glass house and throwing stones. Ben Wallace was the bookie's favorite because of his good war in the Ukraine. A war we are not in, by the way. But he had a good war. And more MPs were backing him than were backing any other. But he has had to pull out, having consulted his family and friends. That leaves a short list of 9. Weirdos, comic singers, and serious players. Let me deal with Jeremy Hunt first. Hunt is the most naked of the undo Brexit candidates. Hunt, who left our health service in such a parlous state that it virtually collapsed with the coronavirus pandemic. Hunt, with his Chinese wife, subject to all the pressures of the Chinese Communist Party. That's what they'll say. He'll be shot down in flames. He will not get into the final 2. And they'll blame it on China. They'll blame it on his poor wife, who is entirely blameless, I assure you. There are others that are just there for the ride, if you'll forgive the phrase. Just to canter down a furlong or 2 before dropping out, but show sufficient class and form that the next time they may be serious players. Badenoch is one of those. Braverman is another of those. They're not serious prime ministerial material, but they are talented, voluble, eloquent women of colour, which of course in today's zeitgeist speaks volumes. The serious 2 contenders are Penny Mordaunt and Rishi Sunak. And I predict they will be the final two. Now, I told you, I declare my interest. I stand to win thousands and thousands of pounds if Penny Mordaunt becomes the next Prime Minister. But that's not why I'm going to say what I'm going to say. If the Tories had any sense, they'd pick her. She's a younger, sexier Margaret Thatcher. She can debate, she can deal with opponents, she can appear on television, she can crush the Scottish nationalist insurrection, she can be everyone's, I don't know what, nurse, governess, whatever these public school boy types like to be spanked by. She can be all of those things. And she's a smart cookie. She's a Royal Navy reservist, and she is the Member of Parliament for Portsmouth. And she looks good in a swimsuit. Better than Rishi Sunak could ever look in a swimsuit.